I never thought I'd spend Christmas alone at 62. Not after 40 years of hosting holiday gatherings where laughter echoed through my home like the sweetest music. But there I was, staring at a text message from my daughter-in-law Natalie that made my hands tremble. "We've decided to do Christmas at our house this year. Just immediate family. Hope you understand." Immediate family. The words stung like ice against bare skin. Apparently, after raising my son Ethan for 35 years, I no longer qualified as immediate family. Before you judge me for what happened next, let me tell you, I'm not the villain of this story. I'm just a woman who finally learned that sometimes love needs boundaries to survive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Wheeler. For most of my adult life, I was known as Maggie the Giver, always ready with a home-cooked meal, a generous check, or an open door. My late husband Daniel used to joke that I'd give away our roof if someone mentioned they liked the shingles. After he passed away from cancer 7 years ago, that giving nature only intensified. Without him, I poured everything into our only son Ethan, his wife Natalie, and their twin daughters, Lily and Rose. My colonial-style house in Mapleton was too big for one person, but I stayed because it was where Ethan grew up, where holidays happened, where memories lived in every corner. I kept the dining room exactly how Daniel had loved it. Warm cherry wood table that could seat 14, his grandmother's china displayed in the hutch, family photos lining the walls. This room had hosted 35 consecutive Christmas dinners. Until now. The uninvitation didn't come out of nowhere. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the increasing demands, the thinning gratitude, the way conversations ended when I entered rooms. But love has a way of blinding us to the obvious. 3 months before Christmas, Ethan called asking if I could help with their down payment on a vacation property in Aspen. "Just a small cabin," he said, though the price tag of $120,000 suggested otherwise. I transferred the money the next day without hesitation. 2 weeks later, Natalie texted photos of their rustic little getaway, a 3,500 square foot luxury chalet with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. When they invited me to their house for dinner the following weekend, I expected some form of thanks. Instead, Natalie spent the evening describing their renovation plans, while Ethan nodded along, occasionally glancing at his phone. Neither mentioned the money. When I brought homemade apple pie, Ethan's childhood favorite, Natalie placed it in the refrigerator untouched, saying they were watching carbs. As I was leaving, Ethan walked me to the door and casually mentioned they were planning a Christmas ski trip to the new chalet. "But what about our family Christmas dinner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He shrugged, not quite meeting my eyes. "We thought we'd change things up this year. The girls want to learn to ski." I nodded and smiled, though something cold had settled in my stomach. Of course. Whatever makes the girls happy. That night, I pulled out photo albums from past Christmases, Ethan in footy pajamas opening presents, Daniel carving the turkey, 4 generations gathered around the table. 35 years of tradition dismissed with a shrug. A week later, I was at the supermarket when I spotted Natalie having lunch with her mother, Sharon, at the cafe next door. I was about to go say hello when their conversation made me pause. "So what did Maggie say about Christmas?" Sharon asked, stirring her coffee. Natalie laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the cafe noise. "We haven't officially told her yet. Ethan's worried she'll make a scene." "Well, she does tend to be clingy," Sharon said, "but at least she's generous with her checkbook." True. That Aspen down payment was a godsend, though it would be nice if the money came without the constant hovering. My hands tightened around my shopping cart as Sharon leaned forward. "Have you asked her about putting the house in Ethan's name yet?" Natalie sighed. "Not yet. We're waiting for the right moment. maybe after the holidays when she's feeling lonely and guilty about missing Christmas with the twins. Smart, emotional. Leverage always works with the mother-in-law type. They clinked coffee cups like conspirators sealing a deal, while I stood frozen, a glass wall suddenly between me and the rest of the world. In that moment, I saw myself through their eyes, not a beloved mother and grandmother, but an ATM with attachment issues. I abandoned my shopping cart and walked straight to my car. I don't remember driving home, only that when I arrived, I sat in my driveway for nearly an hour, unable to move, replaying every interaction with Ethan and Natalie over the past year, through this new, devastating lens. The frequent calls that always ended with financial requests. The visits that seemed timed around major purchases. The way Natalie complimented my jewelry, furnishings, and keepsakes with a calculating look, as if mentally cataloging her future inheritance. That night, I received a group text from Natalie. Christmas update. We're doing a ski trip to Aspen this year instead of the usual dinner. Just the 4 of us, keeping it small. Maybe we can do a quick brunch before we leave? No question. No consideration that I might be hurt. Just an announcement with a consolation prize of a rushed meal. I didn't respond. For 3 days, I moved through my house like a ghost, touching Daniel's books, the walls where we'd marked Ethan's height each birthday, the kitchen where I'd taught him to bake cookies. Every corner held memories of a family I thought I had. One that respected care and sacrifice as much as financial support. On the 4th day, something shifted inside me. I opened my laptop and began searching property laws, financial protection measures, and estate planning. If I was just a checkbook to them, I needed to be smarter about the pen that signed it. The uninvitation text came 2 weeks later. I read it standing in my kitchen, where the Christmas menu I'd been planning sat half-finished on the counter. 36 ingredients carefully listed for dishes everyone loved. Ethan's favorite cornbread stuffing, the twins' chocolate peppermint cake, even Natalie's preferred cranberry and walnut salad. Instead of responding immediately, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to Daniel's study. In this room, with his presence still palpable in the worn leather chair and books lining the walls, I allowed myself to finally cry. Not just for this Christmas, but for the years of one-way giving, the growing hollowness of family gatherings, and the slow erosion of what I thought was unconditional love. After the tears came clarity. I picked up my phone and typed, I understand completely. Enjoy your holidays. Then I called my lawyer. Leonard Morris had been Daniel's friend since college and our family attorney for decades. When I explained what I needed, his usual jovial manner turned serious. Maggie, are you sure about this? It's a significant change. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, meetings, and decisions I'd postponed for too long. Through it all, I maintained my usual communication with Ethan and Natalie, sending the twins birthday cards with checks, responding to occasional texts with cheerful emojis, never letting on that anything had changed. A week before Christmas, Ethan called. Mom, quick question. Do we still have access to Grandpa's lake cabin? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Some investors are interested in similar properties in that area, and I thought we could stop by after our ski trip. The cabin, my father's beloved fishing retreat that he'd left to me, where Ethan had spent childhood summers learning to fish and swim. It wasn't particularly valuable, but it was rich with memories and the last connection to my parents. The cabin. I kept my voice neutral. Why do you ask? Just looking at options. Real estate near water is booming right now. I closed my eyes briefly. I see. Well, we can discuss it after your trip. Great. Also, can you send over Grandma's diamond brooch? Natalie wants to wear it to the Christmas gala at the resort. The brooch had been my mother's most precious possession, given to me on her deathbed, with the instruction to pass it to someone who would treasure it as she had. I'd been saving it for Lily and Rose when they were old enough to appreciate its history. "I'll see if I can find it," I lied. That evening, as I decorated my small artificial tree alone, a far cry from the 12-foot pines we usually selected as a family, I realized I wasn't sad anymore. The ache had been replaced by something else. Resolve. 2 days before Christmas, a knock at my door surprised me. Opening it, I found Lily and Rose on my doorstep, their cheeks pink from the cold. "Grandma!" they chorused, rushing forward to hug me. Behind them stood Ethan, looking uncomfortable. "The girls insisted on saying goodbye before our trip," he explained. I welcomed them in, my heart warming at the genuine affection in my granddaughter's eyes. "We made you something," Rose said, pulling a wrapped package from her coat. Inside was a handmade photo frame containing a picture of the four of us from last summer. "So you won't be lonely on Christmas," Lily explained. I hugged them tight, inhaling the scent of their fruity shampoo and sweet innocence. "Thank you, my darlings. This is the best gift." As the girls explored the house to say goodbye to their favorite spots, Rose explained. Ethan lingered awkwardly in the living room. "Mom, I know you're probably upset about Christmas." I waved him off. "It's fine, Ethan. Families change, traditions evolve." He seemed relieved by my easy acceptance. "Right, exactly. And about that brooch. I've set it aside for the girls when they're older," I said firmly. "Some things should stay in the family for generations, don't you think?" Before he could respond, the girls bounded back in. "Grandma, can we have hot chocolate? One last time before our trip?" We moved to the kitchen, where I prepared their favorite peppermint hot chocolate. As they chatted about ski lessons and Christmas wishes, I studied Ethan. He was scrolling through his phone, disconnected from the moment, from the joy his daughters were experiencing in their grandmother's kitchen. "Dad, look." Lily held up her marshmallow creation. "It's a snowman." He glanced up briefly. "Cool, kiddo." Then back to his screen. Something in me hardened. The twins deserved better than this half-attention, this lesson that people were valuable only for what they provided. My grandchildren would not learn that calculating coldness I'd heard in the cafe. After they left, I made one final call to Leonard. "It's time," I said. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. I woke early, made myself cinnamon coffee, and sat by the window watching the neighborhood children test new sleds and bikes. For the first time in decades, my kitchen was quiet. No turkey in the oven, no potatoes boiling, no Daniel sneaking tastes when he thought I wasn't looking. At precisely 9 a.m., my phone chimed with a text from Natalie. "Merry Christmas from Aspen. Girls loved their gifts. Thanks." Attached was a photo of the twins in matching ski jackets beside a towering tree in what must have been their chalet, my down payment chalet. No invitation to video chat, no question about how I was spending the day. Just a dutiful acknowledgement, obligation fulfilled. I didn't respond. Instead, I dressed carefully in a red sweater Daniel had given me years ago, applied lipstick, and drove across town. The Golden Pines retirement community wasn't where most would choose to spend Christmas, but when I walked into the community room, cheers erupted. Dozens of elderly residents, many without families to visit them, were gathered around a modest tree. "She's here," called Eleanor, a spirited 80-year-old who had organized this gathering. "Our Christmas angel has arrived." I smiled, setting down the bags of carefully wrapped gifts I'd brought. Books, handmade scarves, framed photos I'd taken of the local gardens, and homemade cookies. Nothing expensive, just thoughtful items selected for each person based on conversations we'd had during my volunteer visits throughout the year. What Ethan and Natalie didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask about, was how I'd spent my time since Daniel died. 3 days a week, I volunteered at Golden Pines, reading to residents, helping with activities, or simply listening to their stories. These people had become my second family, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation or inheritance. As we shared a potluck meal, sang carols, and exchanged simple gifts, warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the crackling fireplace. Here, among people who had lived long enough to value presence over presence, I wasn't an ATM or a house deed waiting to be transferred. I was Maggie, valued for my stories, my laughter, my willingness to listen. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the day. Ethan, then Natalie, then Ethan again. I let the calls go to voicemail. This day was for joy, not manufactured urgency. Only when I returned home that evening did I listen to the messages. Ethan's voice, initially annoyed, grew increasingly panicked. "Mom, call me back. Mom, there's something wrong with our checking account. Mom, the resort says our payment didn't go through. Mom, please, we're about to be kicked out of the chalet. What's going on?" The final message came from Natalie, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Margaret, what have you done? The credit cards aren't working. The bank says our why. Accounts are frozen, and now the resort wants us out by tonight. The girls are crying. Is this how you want to be remembered? As the grandmother who ruined Christmas?" I poured myself a small glass of Daniel's favorite whiskey, something I did only on significant occasions, and called Ethan. He answered immediately. "Mom, finally! We're in a nightmare here." "Ethan," I interrupted, my voice calm. "I want you to put me on speakerphone. Natalie should hear this too." A rustling sound, then Natalie's sharp, "We're both here. Explain what you've done." "First, are the girls within earshot?" A pause. "No, they're in the other room watching TV. Now talk." I took a sip of whiskey, savoring the warmth. 3 months ago, you asked me for $120,000 for a down payment on a small cabin. You didn't say thank you. 2 weeks later, you showed me pictures of a luxury chalet. Last month, I overheard Natalie discussing how to convince me to sign over my house to you. And yesterday, you asked about selling my father's cabin, a place filled with memories, for investment purposes. Silence on the other end. Then Ethan, defensive. "Mom, you're overreacting." "I'm not finished," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "For years, I've given without complaint. Money for your wedding, your house, your cars. Childcare whenever you asked. Emotional support through every crisis. And in return, you uninvited me from the holiday I've hosted for 35 years and plan to use my loneliness to manipulate me into giving you more." "That's not fair," Natalie began, but I continued. "The $120,000 I gave you wasn't a gift. It was a loan, with terms and conditions you signed without reading because you were in such a hurry to get the money. Those terms included immediate repayment if the property was misrepresented to me or if there was any attempt to leverage my assets without my knowledge." "You tricked us?" Ethan's voice rose in disbelief. "No, I protected myself. There's a difference. The loan is now due in full, which is why your accounts show insufficient funds. The bank has placed a hold for the repayment amount." "We don't have that kind of money just sitting around," Natalie cried. "What are we supposed to do?" "The same thing millions of adults do. Accept the consequences of your actions. You have 2 options. Repay the loan with interest or forfeit your claim to the chalet. Leonard has the paperwork ready." Ethan's voice turned pleading. "Mom, it's Christmas. The girls will learn an important lesson about honesty, respect, and the true meaning of family," I finished for him. "By the way, I've restructured my will. The house, the cabin, my savings, none of it goes directly to you anymore." "What?" The shock in his voice was almost comical. "Then who gets it?" "Lily and Rose will receive trust funds for education and housing when they turn 25, managed by Leonard until then. The house will be sold upon my death, with proceeds going to Golden Pines Retirement Community, where I spent Christmas today with people who value my company more than my checkbook." "You can't do this to us," Natalie sputtered. "I already have. But here's what I can do. I can forgive you both if you're willing to rebuild our relationship on mutual respect. I can still be the mother and grandmother who loves you, just not the one who funds your lifestyle or tolerates being used." "This is emotional blackmail," Ethan said bitterly. I laughed, actually laughed. "No, son. This is consequences. Something I should have introduced you to years ago." I paused, softening my tone slightly. "Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation about family. Until then, Merry Christmas." I hung up and sat in Daniel's chair, his presence almost palpable. "I did it," I whispered to him. "I finally stood up for myself." My phone remained silent that night and for 3 days afterward. On the 4th day, it rang. Not Ethan or Natalie, but Lily and Rose using their tablet to video call. "Grandma!" Their faces filled the screen, eyes red-rimmed but smiling. "We miss you." "I miss you too, my darlings. How was your Christmas?" They exchanged glances. "We had to leave the big house and stay in a hotel," Rose said. "Mom and Dad were really mad." "But they're not fighting anymore," Lily added. "And Dad said we're coming to visit you next weekend. All of us." My heart stuttered. "Did he now?" "He said we need to have a family meeting," Rose explained importantly. "And that we should bring flowers because we hurt your feelings." After we hung up, I sat for a long time, watching the winter sun set over my neighborhood. I had no illusions that one confrontation would magically transform Ethan and Natalie into grateful, respectful adults. The conversation ahead would be difficult, possibly painful. But for the first time in years, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. I had drawn a boundary and held it. I had valued myself enough to demand better. And perhaps most importantly, I had shown my granddaughters that love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. The following weekend, when the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Ethan standing there alone, a bouquet of my favorite lilies in hand. His eyes were humbled in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy caught breaking rules. "Mom," he said softly, "I think we need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in, closing the door on the cold and opening the way for something new to begin. When my daughter-in-law uninvited me from Christmas, I canceled more than just her plans. I canceled a pattern of taking without giving, of entitlement without gratitude. And in its place, I planted the seeds of something healthier. Love with boundaries, generosity with respect, family with truth. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to do better, even if it means spending Christmas alone. The following morning, I awakened to sunshine streaming through my bedroom curtains. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since Daniel's passing. The conversation with Ethan had lasted until nearly midnight. Raw, honest words exchanged across my kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals throughout his childhood. "I don't understand," he had said repeatedly, his coffee growing cold between his palms. "We've always had such a good relationship." I took my time answering, choosing words with care rather than emotion. "We had the relationship you wanted, Ethan. One where I gave and you received. That worked fine when you were a child. That's what parenting is. But somewhere along the way, you never transitioned into seeing me as a person with my own needs and feelings." His face had flushed, with defiance at first, but as the evening wore on, something shifted. Perhaps it was when I showed him the journal I'd kept since his father died, documenting every call, every visit, every request for money alongside notes about how I'd felt in those moments. 7 years of one-sided exchanges laid bare in my careful handwriting. "I never meant to hurt you," he'd said finally, his voice small. "I believe that," I told him. "But intent doesn't erase impact." Now, in the fresh light of morning, I wondered what would come next. Ethan had left with promises to reflect, to speak with Natalie, to do better. But promises were easy in moments of guilt. The real test would be whether anything actually changed. I dressed in comfortable clothes and headed downstairs to make breakfast. The house felt different somehow, still mine, but no longer a shrine to past traditions or a waiting inheritance for ungrateful heirs. I'd reclaimed it, just as I'd reclaimed myself. The kitchen phone rang as I was pouring coffee. Eleanor from Golden Pines calling with unexpected news. "Maggie, you won't believe who just arrived with the most enormous donation of art supplies for our recreation program," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Who?" "A young couple with twin girls. Said they're your family? Ethan and Natalie?" My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "They're there now?" "Yes, helping the girls distribute watercolor sets to residents. The little ones are reading to Mr. Peterson. You know how his eyesight's been failing." I thanked her and hung up, unsure what to make of this development. Was this genuine change or a performance for my benefit? Either way, I wouldn't rush to judgment. Time would reveal their true intentions. Instead of waiting at home, I decided to visit my neighbor Martha. At 78, she'd become not just a friend, but a mentor of sorts after Daniel died. She had walked the path of widowhood 15 years before me and navigated it with grace and wisdom I hope to someday achieve. Martha answered her door in gardening clothes, soil smudging her cheek. "Maggie, perfect timing. The kettle just boiled." Her small sunroom overlooked a winter garden that somehow managed to look intentional rather than dormant. We settled into worn wicker chairs with steaming mugs of Earl Grey as I recounted the events of the past weeks. Martha listened without interruption, only the occasional arch of her eyebrow revealing her thoughts. When I finished, she set down her cup decisively. "Good for you," she said simply. "You don't think I went too far?" She scoffed. "Too far would have been letting them continue treating you like an ATM while planning to push you into some facility, once they had your house." I winced at the bluntness, but she wasn't wrong. The conversations I'd overheard between Natalie and her mother had revealed exactly that trajectory. "They're at Golden Pines now," I said. "Donating art supplies, apparently." Martha's eyes narrowed. "First test passed, then. They're trying to show interest in what matters to you. Question is whether it continues when you're not looking or when there's nothing to gain." "How do I know if it's sincere?" She reached across and patted my hand. "Time, Maggie. Time and consistency. Words are easy. Changed behavior takes effort." I nodded, grateful for her clarity. Daniel would have handled this better. He always saw through Ethan's manipulations. "Did he?" Martha raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Or did he simply play the role of disciplinarian while you played nurturer? That's the trap many parents fall into. One becomes the giver, one becomes the boundary setter. When the boundary setter is gone." She gestured expressively. I had never considered this perspective, but she was right. Daniel had been the one to say no, to demand respect, to hold consequences firm. I had been the soft landing, the open wallet, the endless forgiver. With Daniel gone, the balance had disappeared, and I had tried to be both parents without the skills for half the job. Martha and I spent the rest of the morning talking about her grandchildren, successful adults who visited regularly without expectation of inheritance, and her plans to travel to Arizona the following month. Her life was full and self-determined, guided by her own desires rather than others' expectations. It was the future I wanted for myself. When I returned home, a sleek black car I didn't recognize was parked in my driveway. For a moment I thought Ethan had returned, but the woman who emerged was a stranger. Tall, professionally dressed, with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Wheeler?" she called as I approached. "I'm Miranda Phillips from Cornerstone Realty. I understand you're interested in selling your property?" Confusion gave way to anger as I realized what must have happened. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed. My home is not for sale." She frowned, checking her notes. "I have an appointment scheduled by Natalie Dawson. She indicated the family was looking to downsize your living situation." Of course, just as I'd overheard in the cafe, they were already making arrangements, presuming ownership they didn't have. The breathtaking entitlement nearly made me laugh. "Ms. Phillips, I apologize for the confusion, but my daughter-in-law has no authority to sell my home. I suggest you contact her directly to clarify the situation." Her professional composure cracked slightly as she realized the awkward position she'd been placed in. "I see. Again, my apologies for the intrusion." After she drove away, I stood in my driveway for a long moment, taking in the house I'd lived in for nearly 4 decades. It wasn't perfect. The gutters needed cleaning, the paint was fading in spots, and the landscaping had suffered since Daniel's death. But it was mine. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every property tax bill had been paid through my work as a high school librarian and Daniel's modest insurance policy. The realization that Natalie had actually contacted a realtor, had begun the process of disposing of my home while pretending to reconcile, should have devastated me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a thoughtless moment. This was a calculated campaign to take what was mine while keeping me placated. I pulled out my phone and dialed Leonard's number. "I need those trust documents finalized immediately," I said when he answered, "and I want to add a stipulation about contact requirements." "Contact requirements?" He sounded puzzled. "Yes, if Ethan and Natalie want to maintain any hope of the girls accessing their trust funds, they need to ensure the twins have regular, meaningful contact with me. Not supervised visits when it's convenient for them, but actual relationship-building time. Twice monthly, at minimum." Leonard was quiet for a moment. "Maggie, using access to money to force family connection is tricky territory. The courts generally frown upon." "I'm not forcing anyone to do anything," I interrupted. "The twins will get their education funds regardless, but the additional housing trust only activates if they've maintained a relationship with me. It's their parents' choice whether to facilitate that or not." He sighed. "I'll draw up the paperwork, but Maggie, this path you're on, using legal and financial tools to manage family relationships, it doesn't usually lead where people hope." "I'm not trying to control them, Leonard. I'm trying to protect myself and my granddaughters. Ethan and Natalie have already contacted a realtor to sell my house out from under me. What do you suggest I do? Continue to hope they suddenly develop consciences?" His silence was answer enough. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Natalie, standing alone on my porch looking uncharacteristically subdued. "May I come in?" she asked, none of her usual confidence in evidence. I hesitated, then stepped aside. After the realtor incident, I was curious to hear what story she would present. She perched awkwardly on the edge of my sofa, declining my offer of tea. "Ethan told me about your conversation," she began. "I want to apologize for how things have been between us." I nodded but said nothing, waiting. "The truth is," she continued, "I never felt like I belonged in this family. You and Ethan have all these traditions and inside jokes and history that I'm not part of. And your house, this house, it's like a museum to your perfect family that I could never measure up to." This was unexpected. In all our years as in-laws, Natalie had never expressed insecurity, only entitlement. "So you decided to take it?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. She flinched. "It sounds terrible when you put it that way." "How would you put it?" She looked around the living room, at the photos covering the walls, the worn furniture that had witnessed decades of family gatherings. "I thought if we had this house, if it belonged to us, maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged too. like I wasn't just an outsider who married in. The vulnerability in her voice seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. And the realtor, today? She had the grace to flush with embarrassment. I scheduled that appointment weeks ago, before everything happened. I forgot to cancel it. I swear, Maggie, it wasn't meant to be malicious. But it was meant to be behind my back, I pointed out. Just like the Christmas plans, just like the discussions about getting me to sign over my property. You and Ethan have consistently made decisions about my life without my input. She didn't deny it. We thought we were being practical. You're alone in this big house. As you get older. I'm 62, Natalie, not 92. I'm healthy, active, and perfectly capable of deciding my own future. When I need help, I'll ask for it. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I understand that now, and I am sorry. For everything. The Christmas uninvitation, the way we've taken your generosity for granted, all of it. I studied her face, searching for signs of the calculating woman I'd overheard in the cafe. There was remorse there, certainly, but also something else. A pragmatic assessment of the new power dynamics between us. Natalie had always been adaptable. Now that she understood the money wouldn't flow freely, she was adjusting her approach. Thank you for the apology, I said finally. Actions will speak louder than words going forward. She nodded again, then reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. This is for you. It's not much, but it's a start. Inside was a check for $25,000, a fraction of what they owed, but more than I'd expected to see. We're putting the chalet on the market, she explained. This is the deposit money we'll get back when it sells. We'll pay the rest as soon as we can. And the girls? How are they handling all this? Her expression softened genuinely for the first time. They miss you. They don't understand what happened, just that there was a grown-up problem about money. They loved visiting the retirement home. Rose wants to go back and finish the book she was reading to that gentleman. Mr. Peterson, I supplied. He was a literature professor before he retired. That explains why he was correcting her pronunciation, Natalie said with a small laugh. The moment felt almost normal, a grandmother and mother sharing stories about children we both loved. But the bridge between us had been damaged, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fully repaired. I'd like to see them, I said. Without the pressure of family meetings or apologies, just grandmother and granddaughters. Of course, Natalie agreed quickly. How about this weekend? I could drop them off Saturday morning? Ethan has meetings, so it would just be me. I agreed, and she left soon after, the conversation having reached its natural conclusion. As I watched her drive away, I tried to sort through my feelings. The apology had seemed sincere enough, the check a concrete step toward making amends. But trust, once broken, doesn't mend easily. I called Martha to recount the conversation. She said when I finished. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. Apologizing right after you caught her trying to sell your house. That takes nerve. You don't think she meant it? Oh, I think she meant it. People can be genuinely sorry and still fundamentally unchanged. The question is, what's driving the apology? Fear of losing access to your money? Real remorse? A desire to keep the family peace for the girl's sake? Only time will tell. You're not very optimistic. About people, are you? I observed. Martha chuckled. I'm realistic about people. I've lived long enough to see that most folks act in their own self-interest. The trick is finding people whose self-interest aligns with treating you well. That night, I dreamed of Daniel. We were sitting on our back porch swing as we had countless summer evenings, his arm around my shoulders, the weight and warmth of him so real I could almost smell his aftershave. You're doing the right thing, Maggie, he said, his voice exactly as I remembered. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean you don't love them. I woke with tears on my cheeks but a lightness in my heart that hadn't been there before. Saturday arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed the neighborhood into a greeting card scene. Natalie dropped off the twins at 9, bundled in matching pink snowsuits. "I'll pick them up at 4, she said, hesitating on the porch. "Unless. Would you like me to stay? We could all have lunch together." The olive branch was unexpected. Part of me wanted to refuse, to have my granddaughters to myself. But another part recognized the effort this represented. "That would be nice," I heard myself say. "I'm making vegetable soup and grilled cheese, the girl's favorite." Surprise and something like relief crossed her face. "Thank you. I'll be back around noon then." The morning with Lily and Rose was precious. We baked cookies, built a snowman in the backyard, and started a jigsaw puzzle that had been gathering dust since Daniel died. Neither girl mentioned the family tension directly, though Rose did ask why we hadn't had Christmas together. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense to children," I explained, helping her fit a puzzle piece into place. "But it doesn't change how much we love each other." "Mom said you were mad at them," Lily said matter-of-factly, "because they weren't being nice. Children always understand more than adults give them credit for." "I was disappointed," I acknowledged. "But we're working through it." "Like when I'm mean to Rose and have to apologize and then we make up?" Lily asked. "Something like that, yes." By the time Natalie returned for lunch, the house was filled with the aroma of soup and the sound of the girls' laughter. She entered cautiously, as if expecting a cold reception, but relaxed when I handed her an apron. "You can butter the bread for the sandwiches," I said, just as I would have before everything fell apart. We worked together in the kitchen, not quite comfortable but not openly hostile either. As we set the table, I noticed Natalie looking at the photographs on the wall, younger versions of Ethan and me smiling from various frames. "I've always wondered," she said, gesturing to a picture of 10-year-old Ethan holding a trophy. "What was this for?" "Science fair," I replied. "He built a working model of a hydroelectric dam, stayed up 3 nights in a row to finish it." She stared at the image. "He never told me he was into science." "He was into everything for about 6 months at a time. Science, baseball, chess, rock collecting. Daniel called him our Renaissance boy." "I didn't know that." Something wistful crossed her face. "There's so much about his childhood I don't know." "You never asked," I pointed out, but gently. She nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. I was always focused on our future, not his past. The moment was interrupted by the twins clamoring for lunch, but something had shifted between us. For perhaps the first time, Natalie was seeing me as a keeper of stories she'd never heard, a connection to a history she'd never bothered to explore. After lunch, we all played board games at the dining table. Candyland and Chutes and Ladders. Games simple enough for the girls but engaging. Enough for adults. Natalie was competitive but let the twins win occasionally, showing a playfulness I rarely witnessed. When 4 o'clock came, neither she nor the girls seemed eager to leave. "Maybe we could stay a little longer?" she suggested tentatively. "The girls are having such a good time." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. They stayed for dinner. Nothing fancy, just leftover soup and fresh bread. And by the time they finally left at 7, something fundamental had begun to heal. Not completely, not irreversibly, but enough to give me hope. The following week brought more surprises. Ethan called midweek, asking if he could stop by on his lunch break. He arrived with sandwiches from my favorite deli and a sheaf of papers. "We're officially putting the chalet on the market," he said, spreading the listing agreement on the counter. "I wanted you to see that we're serious about making things right." I reviewed the document. They were asking barely more than they'd paid, clearly prioritizing a quick sale over profit. "You don't have to sell it," I said. "A payment plan would be acceptable." He shook his head firmly. "No, this is the right thing to do. We took advantage of your generosity, and we need to make a clean break from that pattern. We ate our sandwiches in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about me never seeing you as a person with your own needs. He looked uncomfortable but pressed on. You were right. After Dad died, I just expected you to slip into the role of supportive widowed mother, always available, always giving. I never considered what you wanted for this chapter of your life. What prompted this reflection? I asked. He smiled, ruefully. Partly you freezing our accounts. Nothing like financial consequences to focus the mind. His expression grew more serious. But also seeing you with the girls, watching how they light up around you, how you have this whole relationship with them that exists independently of me and Natalie. It made me realize you're not just my mother. You're a whole person with connections and interests I know nothing about. The admission was more than I'd expected. Thank you for recognizing that. So, he said, clearing his throat, what do you want for this chapter? If money and family obligations weren't factors, what would Maggie Wheeler choose for? Herself? The question caught me off guard. In the years since Daniel died, no one had asked what I wanted. It was always assumed I would continue as before, just lonelier. I'd travel, I said finally. There are so many places Daniel and I planned to see when he retired. We had a whole map marked up in his study. The memory brought a pang of loss, but not the overwhelming grief of earlier years. I'd take classes, art history maybe, or creative writing. I'd spend more time at Golden Pines, build deeper friendships there. I'd transform the spare bedrooms into spaces that serve me instead of waiting for visitors who rarely come. Ethan listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't since childhood. Then that's what you should do, he said simply. It's not that easy. There are financial considerations, practical matters. I'm not saying quit everything tomorrow and fly to Paris. I'm saying start planning as if these things are possible, because they are. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. It's time to prioritize yourself. Coming from the son who had benefited most from my caretaking, the words carried unexpected weight. The conversation shifted to more mundane matters, the twins' school projects, Ethan's work challenges, a leak in their bathroom that was proving difficult to fix. Normal family talk that felt both familiar and newly precious. As he was leaving, Ethan hesitated at the door. Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Natalie and we're thinking about separating. The news shocked me. Despite their united front in taking advantage of my generosity, I hadn't sensed marital problems between them. Why? Is it because of what happened with me? He shook his head. Not directly, though the financial stress didn't help. We've been drifting apart for years, staying together for the girls and, well, honestly, for the lifestyle we couldn't maintain separately. He looked ashamed. The chalet was supposed to be a last-ditch effort to find some happiness together. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Whatever my issues with their treatment of me, I never wished for my son's marriage to end. Don't be. It might be the healthiest decision we've made in years. We're seeing a counselor, trying to figure out if there's anything worth salvaging, beyond our co-parenting relationship. After he left, I sat in Daniel's study, surrounded by books neither of us would finish and travel plans we'd never complete together. Life was unpredictable, messy, and often painful. But it continued, offering new possibilities alongside each loss. The next day, I did something I'd been contemplating for months. I enrolled in a creative writing course at the community college, Tuesday evenings for 8 weeks. It wasn't Paris or Rome, but it was a step toward the life I wanted, one where my needs mattered too. When I shared the news with Martha, she clapped her hands in delight. It's about time! Next thing you know, you'll be one of those globe-trotting grandmothers who send postcards from exotic locales. Let's not get carried away, I laughed. It's just a writing class. But we both knew it represented something larger, a declaration, that my story wasn't over, that the narrative wasn't limited to my roles as mother, grandmother, or widow. I was still authoring my own life, one choice at a time. The weekend brought another family gathering, this time at a neutral location. A local park with a playground for the twins. Ethan and Natalie arrived in separate cars but interacted civilly, their focus clearly on creating a stable environment for their daughters despite their own uncertainty. As I watched Lily pump her legs on the swing, calling, "Higher, Daddy, higher!" While Rose showed Natalie a caterpillar she'd discovered, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for the challenges ahead for this fractured family. Relief that pretenses had been dropped in favor of honest communication. Hope that whatever shape our relationships took going forward would be built on genuine respect rather than obligation or convenience. Later, as we shared a picnic lunch on a checkered blanket, Natalie surprised me by asking about my writing class. "What will you be working on? Memoirs? Fiction?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "The syllabus says we'll try different forms." "You should write about your life," Ethan suggested. "You've seen so much history firsthand." His comment made me laugh. "You make me sound ancient. I'm not exactly a primary source on World War II. "No, but you lived through so many cultural shifts," he persisted. "The women's movement, civil rights, the transition from analog to digital everything. Plus all the family stories Grandma used to tell about coming to America." I was touched that he remembered his grandmother's immigration stories, tales I'd repeated throughout his childhood, but assumed had been forgotten in the rush toward adulthood. "Maybe I will," I said. "There are stories worth preserving." As the afternoon wound down, I found myself sitting alone with Natalie, while Ethan took the girls for one last turn on the playground before we parted ways. "I want you to know," she said, watching the twins scramble across the monkey bars, "that regardless of what happens between Ethan and me, I want you to remain a constant in the girls' lives." The olive branch was unexpected, but welcome. "I'd like that very much. And I'm sorry, truly sorry for everything. For the Christmas uninvitation, for the realtor, for all the times I treated your generosity as an entitlement." This time, the apology held no undertone of calculation, no hint of an agenda beyond genuine remorse. "I appreciate that, Natalie." We watched the girls play in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke again. "You know, when I was growing up, my family never had money for extras. My dad left when I was 4, and Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I always promised myself my children would have everything I didn't. Big Christmases, fancy vacations, the best schools. The twins are fortunate to have those advantages," I acknowledged. "But somewhere along the way, I started confusing things with security," she continued. "As if accumulating houses and investments could protect us from life's uncertainties." It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen her, this woman who typically presented such a polished, controlled exterior. "That's a common mistake," I said, gently. "One I've made myself." She looked at me questioningly. "After Daniel died, I poured everything into creating stability for Ethan and the girls. Financial support, childcare, maintaining traditions. I thought if I could just keep everything the same, we wouldn't have to feel the full impact of his absence." I gestured toward my son and granddaughters, now engaged in a game of tag. But relationships aren't frozen in amber. They either grow or they wither. There's no standing still. Natalie nodded slowly. "I think Ethan and I stopped growing together a long time ago. That doesn't mean you can't both grow into better co-parents, better people. Better daughter-in-law?" She asked with a tentative smile. "We'll see," I replied, but returned the smile to soften the words. As we gathered our things to leave, Lily ran up and threw her arms around my waist. "Next time, can we have a sleepover at your house, Grandma? Please?" The request sent a ripple of tension through the adults. In our newfound truce, we hadn't yet navigated overnight visits. Before I could form a diplomatic response, Natalie spoke up. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, sweetie. Maybe next weekend?" She glanced at me for confirmation. "I'd love that," I said, warmth spreading through me at the simple joy of these ordinary family negotiations. Driving home alone, I reflected on how much had changed in the week since that cold text message uninviting me from Christmas. The path forward wasn't clear or certain. Ethan and Natalie's marriage hung in the balance. Years of mistrust couldn't be erased overnight, and we were all learning new ways of relating to each other. But for the first time in years, I felt truly seen by my family, not as a resource to be tapped or an obligation to be managed, but as Margaret Wheeler, mother, grandmother, widow, writer, volunteer, friend. A woman with her own dreams and needs, her own story still unfolding. The uninvitation that had initially felt like rejection had become an unexpected gift, the push I needed to reclaim my voice, my boundaries, and ultimately, my place at the center of my own life. The twins' sleepover the following weekend marked a turning point. As I prepared their favorite bedroom, the one with twin beds covered in quilts my mother had made, I realized this was the first time in nearly a year they'd stayed overnight without their parents orchestrating every detail. In the past, Natalie had always sent extensive instructions, called multiple times to check in, and generally treated me like an inexperienced babysitter rather than a grandmother who had raised a child of her own. This time, she simply dropped off their small suitcases with a casual, "They've already had dinner, but they might want a snack before bed. Call if you need anything." The change was subtle but significant. Trust, like a delicate seedling, was beginning to take root again. The evening unfolded in a gentle rhythm of bedtime stories, whispered secrets, and the kind of unstructured togetherness that creates lasting memories. As I tucked them in, Rose asked the question children eventually ask all adults in their lives. "Grandma, were you ever little like us?" I smiled, settling onto the edge of her bed. "I was, a very long time ago." "Did you have a grandma too?" Lily called from the other bed. "I did. Her name was Eleanor, and she lived in a small apartment above a bakery. Every Sunday she would let me help make bread, and the whole building would smell like heaven." The girls peppered me with questions. Was school different? Did I have a television? Had I ever seen a dinosaur? Each answer seeming to expand their understanding of time and family continuity. "Do you have pictures of when you were little?" Rose asked, fighting a yawn. "A few. They're in an album in my study. We can look at them tomorrow if you'd like." They nodded sleepily, and I kissed each forehead before turning out the light. At the doorway, I paused to watch their small forms, already drifting toward sleep, and felt a profound gratitude. Whatever happened with Ethan and Natalie, these precious bonds would endure. The next morning, we pored over old photo albums, not just from my childhood, but from Ethan's as well. The girls were fascinated by pictures of their father as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, riding the same bicycle he had later taught them to ride. "Daddy's hair was so long," Lily giggled, pointing to his teenage rebellion phase. "He went through a period where he refused to let me cut it," I explained. "Said he was going to be in a rock band." "Was he?" Rose asked wide-eyed. "For about 3 weeks. Then he decided he wanted to be an astronaut instead." We were still laughing over family photos when Ethan arrived to pick them up. He joined us on the sofa, his own memories sparked by images he hadn't seen in years. "I'd forgotten about that Halloween," he said, pointing to himself at 9, dressed as a homemade robot with dryer vent tubes for arms. "You stayed up all night making that costume after I changed my mind at the last minute." "You'd been planning to be a cowboy for weeks," I recalled. Then suddenly, the day before, nothing would do but a robot. "You never made me feel bad about changing my mind," he said quietly. "You just figured out a solution." The simple observation held a weight, beyond the childhood anecdote. For so many years, I had been the problem solver, the one who made everything work regardless of the cost to myself. It was a role I had embraced, even prided myself on, but it had come at a price neither of us had fully recognized until now. When the twins ran to get their suitcases, Ethan handed me an envelope. "The chalet sold," he said. "Faster than we expected. This is the rest of what we owe you, plus interest." I accepted the envelope without opening it. "Thank you." "We're still selling our current house," he continued. "It's too much for one income, and neither of us wants to stay there anyway. Too many memories of trying to make something work that was already broken. Where will you go?" "I found a 2-bedroom apartment close to the girls' school. Natalie's looking at something similar in the same district so the twins won't have to switch schools." The logistics of divorce, dividing not just possessions, but the physical spaces of daily life. I remembered how strange it had felt after Daniel died, sleeping in a bed suddenly too large, cooking meals for one instead of two. "It won't be easy," I said. "No," he agreed. "But it feels honest, which our marriage hasn't for a long time." After they left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the ephemera of family history, photos, children's artwork, souvenirs, from trips taken decades ago. For years, I had been the repository of these memories, the keeper of traditions, the constant while others changed around me. But I too was changing. The writing class had awakened something long dormant, a voice that existed separate from my role as mother or grandmother. Each Tuesday evening, I joined a circle of diverse strangers united by a desire to shape experience into words. Some wrote fiction, others poetry or memoir, but all brought their unique perspective to the page. My first piece had been tentative, a carefully sanitized account of my early marriage. But as weeks passed, my writing grew bolder, more truthful. I wrote about the crushing loneliness after Daniel died, the complex love I felt for a son who both fulfilled and disappointed me, the shock of discovering my own invisibility to those I had given everything to. "This is powerful work, Margaret," my instructor had said after I shared a particularly raw piece about the Christmas uninvitation. "You've captured that moment when love and anger collide, when betrayal forces a reckoning." Her words had stayed with me, validating the complex emotions I'd navigated these past months. Anger and love were not mutually exclusive. Sometimes, in fact, anger was the necessary catalyst for love to evolve into something healthier. The following Wednesday, I received an unexpected call from Natalie's mother, Sharon. We had never been close, our relationship defined by polite small talk at family gatherings and the occasional exchange of birthday cards. "Margaret," she began. "Without preamble, I understand you've caused quite the upheaval in Ethan and Natalie's lives." Her tone immediately raised my defenses. "Hello, Sharon. It's been some time since we've spoken." "Yes, well, I thought it was time we cleared the air. Natalie tells me you've forced them to sell their beautiful new chalet and that they're now divorcing. I have to say, I'm disappointed in your interference." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Sharon was only hearing Natalie's version of events. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't force anyone to do anything. I simply required repayment of a loan that was presented to me under false pretenses." "A loan? Between family? That's rather cold, don't you think?" "What's cold is planning to sell someone's home without their knowledge or consent," I replied, surprised by my own calm in the face of her accusation. "Or discussing how to manipulate an elderly relative into signing over their assets." There was a pause on the line. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "I overheard you and Natalie at the cafe, Sharon, the day you suggested using my loneliness, after missing Christmas as emotional leverage to get me to put my house in Ethan's name." Another longer pause. "You misunderstood." "I don't think I did, but it doesn't matter now. Ethan and Natalie are making their own choices as adults, and I'm making mine. I'd appreciate it if you respected that." "They're struggling financially. Because of you," she persisted. though with less conviction. They're struggling financially because they consistently lived beyond their means and used me as a safety net. That's not sustainable for any of us. After a few more minutes of tense conversation, Sharon hung up without a proper goodbye. I set the phone down, feeling oddly empowered. 6 months ago, such a confrontation would have left me anxious and second-guessing myself. Now, I recognized Sharon's manipulative tactics for what they were and felt no need to defend choices that required no defense. That evening, I attended a community meeting at Golden Pines. The facility was planning an expansion, adding independent living apartments adjacent to the existing assisted living units. Eleanor had invited me to join the advisory committee, recognizing my regular involvement with residents. "We need voices like yours," she explained as we reviewed architectural plans. "People who understand that aging doesn't mean losing independence or purpose." Looking at the thoughtfully designed spaces, accessible but not institutional, communal areas balancing privacy with connection, I found myself genuinely intrigued. This was a far cry from the dreary nursing home Natalie and Ethan had likely envisioned for my future. "How long before the new units are ready?" I asked. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "About 18 months. Why? Are you considering a move?" "Not immediately," I said. "But eventually, this house will be too much for me to maintain alone. I'd rather plan my next chapter than have someone else plan it for me." She nodded approvingly. "Smart woman. Too many people wait until crisis forces a move. Getting on the interest list now would give you priority when units become available." I filled out the preliminary application before leaving, noting preferences for a corner unit with extra windows and space for a small herb garden. It wasn't a commitment, just an option, but having options was itself a form of freedom I was learning to cherish. Spring arrived with a burst of renewal that seemed to mirror the changes in my own life. The writing class culminated in a public reading where I shared a piece about finding my voice after decades of silence. Martha sat in the front row, beaming with pride as I spoke words that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Afterward, she hugged me tightly. "Daniel would be so proud," she whispered. "Not just of the writing, but of the woman you've become." The twins split their time between Ethan and Natalie's new apartments, adjusting to the reality of divorced parents with the resilience children often display in the face of change. They spent one weekend a month with me, no longer an obligation to be managed, but a relationship to be nurtured. During one such visit, as we planted tomato seedlings, in my backyard garden, Lily looked up with soil smudging her cheeks. "Daddy says you're taking a trip soon." "That's right," I confirmed. "I'm going to Italy for 2 weeks." "All by yourself?" Rose asked, clearly unable to imagine such independence. "With a tour group. There will be other travelers, but yes, I'm going alone." The trip had been Daniel's dream initially. We'd planned to see Venice for our 40th anniversary, but cancer had claimed him 2 years short of that milestone. For a long time, I couldn't bear to think of traveling there without him. Now, it felt like honoring both his memory and my own continued journey to book the trip. "Won't you be scared?" Lily persisted, patting soil around a fragile stem. "A little nervous, perhaps, but not scared. Sometimes doing things that make us nervous helps us grow stronger." Rose nodded sagely. "Like when I did the big slide even, though it looked super high." "Exactly like that," I agreed. The twins extracted a promise that I would send postcards from every city I visited and take pictures of real Italian pizza to compare with our local favorite. Their innocent enthusiasm highlighted how children view the world as full of possibility rather than limitation, a perspective I was working to reclaim in my own life. The trip was still 3 months away, but preparations had already begun. I'd enrolled in a basic Italian language class at the community center, researched comfortable walking shoes, and started a journal of thoughts about traveling solo at 62. Each step was a declaration, Life continues. Joy is still possible. Growth never ends. My birthday in late April brought another surprise. Ethan insisted on hosting a small celebration at his new apartment, a gesture that touched me deeply, as birthdays had often passed with minimal acknowledgement in recent years. I arrived to find not just Ethan and the twins, but also a few of my closest friends from the writing class in Golden Pines. Martha was there, of course, holding court with her sharp wit and keen observations. Even Natalie had stopped by briefly to drop off a thoughtfully chosen gift, a leather travel journal embossed with my initials. "For your Italian adventure," she said, her smile genuine if still slightly guarded. The girls helped pick it out. As I looked around the room at this unlikely gathering, my son building a new life from the wreckage of his marriage, my granddaughters adapting to their changed family circumstances, friends who knew and valued me for myself rather than my caretaking, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was not the life I had envisioned when Daniel and I built our home and family, but it was rich with authentic connection. "Speech!" called Martha as Ethan brought out a cake blazing with candles. I stood unexpectedly moved by the moment. "I don't have anything prepared," I began. "But looking at all of you here today, I'm struck by how different this birthday feels from the last one. A year ago, I was still trying to be who everyone needed me to be. The perfect mother, the devoted grandmother, the reliable friend who never asked for anything in return." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the small gathering. What I've learned since then is that real love, the kind that sustains us, can only exist where there's truth. And sometimes finding that truth means drawing lines, setting boundaries, even walking away for a while. I met Ethan's eyes across the room, seeing in them a new respect that had been absent before. I'm grateful for second chances and new beginnings, for the courage to say no when necessary, and the wisdom to say yes to my own dreams. The small crowd applauded, and Ethan stepped forward with a wrapped package. "This is from me," he said quietly. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before, Daniel and me dancing at someone's wedding, caught in a moment of pure joy, his head thrown back in laughter as I looked up at him with unguarded love. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Going through old albums after our day with the girls. It was stuck between some negatives. I had it restored." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted you to remember that you've always been more than just our mother. You've always been Margaret, too, vibrant, loving, full of life. We just forgot to see it for a while." The acknowledgement, so simple, yet so profound, brought tears to my eyes. Being seen, truly seen, by those we love is perhaps the deepest human longing. After years of invisibility, of being reduced to my function rather than recognized as a whole person, this moment of recognition felt like a blessing. May brought more changes. Leonard called with news that the property next to my father's old lake cabin was for sale. "It's smaller than your current place, but beautifully maintained," he explained. "Might be worth considering as a part-time residence. You could keep your family home but have a retreat for writing and relaxation." I visited the property the following weekend. Standing on the small dock, watching sunlight dance across the water my father had taught me to fish in, I felt a sense of coming full circle. This place held none of the complicated memories of my primary home. No echoes of arguments with Ethan, no ghosts of Daniel's illness, no shadows of Natalie's calculations. Here was a clean slate, a place that could be purely mine rather than a repository of family history. I made an offer the same day. When I told Ethan about the purchase, his reaction surprised me. "I think that's brilliant, Mom. Having a place that's just yours, where you can write and think. You're not upset about me buying property after making such an issue of the chalet?" He shook his head. "The situations aren't remotely comparable. You're using your own money to buy something within your means that serves a clear purpose in your life. We were using your money to purchase a status symbol we couldn't afford and didn't need. His clarity reflected the growth he'd experienced through the painful dissolution of his marriage and financial security. Therapy has been helpful, he admitted when I commented on the change. Facing hard truths about myself, about the patterns I learned and perpetuated. I'm proud of you, I told him, the words simple but heartfelt. June arrived with final preparations for my Italian journey. The twins helped me pack, offering solemn advice about which clothes were truly grandma elegant and which were merely regular grandma. Their occasional overnight visits had become a cherished ritual, free from the tension that had once surrounded our time together. During one such evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Rose asked a question that caught me off guard. Grandma, do you think Mommy and Daddy will ever live together again? I chose my words carefully. I don't think so, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean they don't both love you very much. Mommy says they're better parents when they're not married, Lily offered. She doesn't cry in the bathroom anymore. The casual revelation spoke volumes about what the twins had witnessed in their parents' failing marriage. Children absorb so much more than adults realize, interpreting the emotional currents around them with innocent clarity. Sometimes, I said gently, people can love each other very much but still not be happy together. Your mommy and daddy are finding ways to be the best parents they can be, even if that means living in different homes. Like you and Grandpa, Rose said with the straightforward logic of a 7-year-old. Except he died instead of moving to a different apartment. I smiled, despite the pang her words evoked. That's right. Loss comes in many forms, but love continues. The conversation drifted to lighter topics: a school field trip to the aquarium, plans for summer swimming lessons, whether Italian ice cream would taste different from American ice cream. But the exchange stayed with me, a reminder that the IB twins were processing their own version of the family transformation I had catalyzed by refusing to be uninvited from Christmas. 2 days before my departure for Venice, Natalie asked if we could meet for coffee. We chose a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our homes, not the one where I'd overheard her fateful conversation with Sharon months earlier. She looked different, her designer clothes replaced by simpler attire, her perfectly maintained manicure absent, her expression more open than I remembered. Motherhood and divorce had softened the sharp edges she'd cultivated for so long. Thank you for meeting me, she began once our drinks arrived. I wanted to talk before you left for your trip. I nodded, waiting. These past months have been... She searched for the right word. Clarifying. After the initial shock and anger faded, I've had to face some uncomfortable truths about myself and how I've approached relationships. That takes courage, I acknowledged. My own mother. She hesitated, then pressed on. She taught me that success meant securing financial stability through any means necessary. Her whole life has been about appearances, about leveraging advantages. I thought that was normal. She stirred her coffee unnecessarily. It's only recently I've realized how toxic that mindset is. I thought of Sharon's confrontational call, her inability to understand why manipulating an elderly relative might be problematic. Patterns are hard to break, but not impossible, Natalie said with unexpected firmness. I don't want Lily and Rose growing up believing their value lies in what they can extract from others. I don't want them measuring relationships by material gain. Her insight reflected a depth I hadn't previously credited her with. Children learn from what we do more than what we say. Exactly, which is why I wanted to tell you that I'm going back to school. I'm pursuing a teaching degree, something I've always wanted but set aside for more practical concerns. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased for her. You've always been good with children. I've also been volunteering at a literacy program for immigrant families. It feels good to contribute something meaningful rather than just accumulating things. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not as former adversaries or even as reluctant in-laws, but as two women at different stages of similar journeys. While we would never be close friends, we had reached a place of mutual respect that felt like its own kind of victory. As she walked me to my car, Natalie said something that caught me by surprise. "You know, I'm actually grateful for what happened at Christmas." "You're grateful I was uninvited?" I asked, confused. "I'm grateful you didn't just accept it. That you stood up for yourself instead of continuing to enable behavior you knew was wrong." She looked away, then back at me directly. "You forced us to face consequences, which no one had ever really done before. It was painful, but necessary." Her words stayed with me as I completed final preparations for my trip. In standing up for myself, I had inadvertently created space for everyone in our family to grow. Ethan into a more self-aware man and father, Natalie into a woman defining success on her own terms, the twins into children who understood healthy boundaries, and myself into someone who valued her own dreams alongside family obligations. The morning of my departure arrived with perfect June weather. Ethan insisted on driving me to the airport. The twins buckled into the back seat with handmade cards for me to open on the plane. "We made you a surprise," Lily announced as we neared the terminal. "Show her, Daddy." Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "The girls and I thought you should have this with you." Inside was my mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band I had given to Ethan years ago for his own marriage. "I can't accept this," I said, confused by its return. "It's not the original," he explained. "That one was lost during the difficult period of my marriage. This is a replica I had made. The girls thought you should have something of Grandma's with you in Italy, and I agreed." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, recognizing both the loss of the original ring and the importance of family connection, moved me deeply. I slipped it onto my right hand, feeling its comfortable weight like a talisman. At the security checkpoint, the twins hugged me fiercely, extracting promises to call whenever possible. Ethan's embrace was equally heartfelt, his whispered, "I love you, Mom." No longer an automatic response, but a considered truth. As I moved through security and toward my gate, I felt a lightness that had nothing to do with leaving belongings behind, and everything to do with carrying forward only what truly mattered. Love tempered by respect, generosity balanced with boundaries, history informing but not dictating the future. The uninvitation that had once felt like rejection had become the catalyst for reclaiming my life, my voice, my rightful place at the center of my own story. In canceling more than just Christmas plans, I had created space for new traditions, authentic connections, and the recognition that we are all works in progress, imperfect, vulnerable, but capable of growth until our final breath. Boarding the plane bound for Venice, the city Daniel and I had dreamed of seeing together, I felt his presence not as a ghost or burden, but as a beloved companion in my heart. He would have approved of this journey, this evolution, this woman who had finally learned that loving others begins with valuing oneself. As the aircraft lifted into clear blue skies, I opened the twins' cards, colorful drawings of gondolas and Italian flags, with wobbly handwriting promising, "We will miss you but have the best time ever, Grandma." Their unconditional love, now part of a healthier family ecosystem, would be waiting when I returned. But for now, for these 2 precious weeks, there was just Margaret Wheeler, not defined by roles or relationships, but by dreams, courage, and an open heart ready to embrace whatever came next. The woman who refused to be uninvited from her own life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.